What if the gods of Earth weren't bound to Earth at all, but were already watching the stars long before Starfleet ever existed? Space, the final frontier. But what if it was never empty? What if, hidden between the rise of the United Federation of Planets and the silent watch of starships like the USS Enterprise, there were beings far older than warp drive, older than Vulcan logic, older even than the first spark of human civilization, beings who shaped worlds, then vanished? And what if one day they returned? The stars flickered not with light, but with memory. Captain's log. Stardate, unknown. The voice trembled, though the officer tried to hide it. We are detecting something. Not a vessel, not a life form. It's everywhere. Across the bridge, sensors failed one by one. The universe itself seemed to hesitate, and then they appeared. Not in ships, not through warp, but as if reality itself had made space for them. Golden light tore across the void, like a divine scar. 7 figures stood suspended in space, untouched by vacuum, unmoved by gravity. Their eyes burned with something far beyond science, and in that moment, every law the Federation believed in began to break, because gods had entered the galaxy, and they were not here to observe, they were here to judge. The silence stretched across the cosmos like a held breath. What would happen if the Eternals discovered a universe that had already evolved without them? Would they protect it, or reshape it? The answer begins now. What if the Eternals awakened in a universe where humanity had already reached the stars and no longer needed gods? The Circe was the first to feel it. A ripple, not through space, but through existence itself. She stood aboard a Federation science vessel, her human disguise flickering for a fraction of a second, as her true form, cosmic, radiant, ancient, threatened to emerge. Around her, officers moved in confusion, unaware that one of the oldest beings in the universe stood among them. "Something's wrong," she whispered. But wrong didn't begin to describe it. Across the galaxy, every Eternal felt the same call. Icarus stopped mid-flight above a distant colony world, his eyes narrowing as the stars themselves seemed to distort. Athena froze in the middle of combat training, her weapon dissolving into golden particles. Phastos dropped his tools as every piece of advanced technology around him suddenly felt primitive, because something older than even them had stirred. And it was watching. Deep in uncharted space, beyond Federation maps, beyond Klingon borders, beyond even the cold logic of Vulcans, a signal pulsed, not a distress call, not a communication, a command. Phastos was the first to decode it, not with machines but with instinct. "It's not meant for them," he said, staring at the stars. "It's meant for us." A summoning. The Eternals began to gather, but they weren't alone. On the bridge of the USS Enterprise, alarms blared as the anomaly expanded. Captain James T. Kirk gripped the armrest, his instinct screaming that this was no ordinary encounter. "Report." Spock's voice was combat for once, uncertain. "Captain, the energy readings defy all known physics. It is as if the universe is rewriting its own rules." And then, the viewscreen changed. 7 figures appeared, floating in the void, silent, unmoving, radiant. Gods. Kirk stood slowly, open a channel. There was no response, because they weren't looking at him. They were looking beyond him, at something far greater. Circe felt it before she understood it. A presence, vast, ancient, familiar, and yet terrifyingly different. "They've come," she whispered. "Who?" asked a nearby officer, her eyes filled with something close to fear. "Our creators." Far beyond the edges of known space, a colossal form began to emerge, not a ship, not a being in any conventional sense, but something that dwarfed entire star systems. Illustrious had entered the Star Trek universe, and its purpose was clear: judgment. But of what? The Federation, humanity, or the Eternals themselves? Icarus clenched his fists as he stared into the abyss. "This isn't supposed to happen," he said. Athena turned to him, her voice sharp. "Then why does it feel like it always was?" The truth began to unravel. The Eternals had not been sent to just one world. They had been placed across realities, seeds, observers, catalysts, and now, something had gone wrong. The Celestial's voice echoed not through sound, but through existence itself. A single message: evolution detected, deviation unacceptable. Across countless inhabited worlds, stars dimmed, civilizations trembled, because the Celestial had made its decision. This universe was flawed, and it would be corrected. Circe stepped forward, her heart pounding with something she had not felt in millennia. "Doubt. What if we were never meant to protect them?" she whispered. What if we were only meant to prepare them for this? The Enterprise shook violently as reality itself bent under the Celestials' presence. Kirk shouted, "Shields at maximum." But even as the shields flared, they began to dissolve. Because how do you defend against a god that doesn't obey the rules of your universe? Spock stared at the readings, his logic unraveling. "Captain, this entity is not simply powerful, it is fundamental." And then the Celestial moved. A single gesture, a flicker of golden energy, and an entire distant star system vanished. No explosion, no debris, just erased. Silence fell across the galaxy. The Eternals looked at one another. For the first time since their creation, they didn't know what to do. Icarus broke the silence. "We were sent to guide evolution," he said slowly. Thena's voice was cold. "Then why does this feel like extinction?" And Cersei realized the truth. "If this universe doesn't follow their design," she said, her voice barely audible, "they're going to destroy it." The stars dimmed again, closer this time, much closer, and the Enterprise was directly in its path. What if the Federation's greatest symbol of hope became the first target of a god's judgment, and no one, not even the Eternals, could stop it? The USS Enterprise trembled like a fragile leaf in a cosmic storm. On the bridge, alarms screamed in a language of panic no training could suppress. Consoles sparked, lights flickered, and beyond the viewscreen, the stars themselves seemed to bend inward as if reality was collapsing toward a single, incomprehensible point. Captain James T. Kirk stood firm, even as the deck beneath him groaned. His instincts told him to fight, but for the first time, he didn't know what fighting even meant. "Status," he demanded. Spock didn't answer immediately. That alone was enough to send a chill through every officer on the bridge. Finally, the Spock spoke, his voice quieter than usual, measured, but edged with something dangerously close to disbelief. "Captain, our shields are not failing." Kirk frowned. "Then why are they dropping?" Spock turned, his dark eyes fixed on the readings. "Because they are being ignored." Ignored, not broken, not overwhelmed, simply irrelevant. Before anyone could respond, the viewscreen flared with blinding gold. The Celestial's presence expanded, and then a beam of pure silent energy descended toward the Enterprise. Not fast, not violent, but inevitable, like a decision already made. "Evasive maneuvers," Kirk shouted. Sulu reacted instantly, hands flying across the controls. The Enterprise banked hard, engines roaring as it pushed beyond safe limits. But the beam didn't follow. It didn't need to, because it wasn't aiming at the ship. It was aiming at reality itself, and the Enterprise just happened to be in the way. Cersei felt it before it struck, a crushing weight not on her body, but on her existence. Her disguise shattered, golden energy rippling across her skin as her true eternal form emerged. Around her, the crew gasped, stumbling back in shock as the woman they thought they knew transformed into something other. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice layered with cosmic resonance. But who could stay calm when a god was about to erase them? "I can stop it," she whispered to herself. But could she? Even she didn't believe it. Still, she raised her hands, golden light forming between her fingers. Matter bent, energy twisted. The very fabric of space responded to her will. For a moment, just a moment, the beam slowed. Kirk stared in disbelief. "What are you?" Cersei didn't look at him. "Someone who's about to fail." The beam surged. Her power cracked like glass under pressure. The golden light around her flickered, unstable, fragile. Because this wasn't just energy, this was judgment, and no Eternal had ever defied that, and won. Far across the stars, Icarus saw the beam. Without hesitation, he launched himself forward, tearing through space faster than any starship could dream of. His eyes burned with fierce determination. "They will not fall," he growled. But even as he flew, doubt crept in. Could he really stand against a Celestial? Or was he just racing toward his own end? Back on the Enterprise, the beam was seconds away. Crew members braced for impact. Some prayed. Others simply stared, unable to comprehend what was about to happen. Spock remained at his station, his expression unreadable. "Fascinating," he murmured. Kirk shot him a look. "Now's not the time, Spock." But Spock's gaze didn't waver. On the contrary, "Captain, this may be the only time." The beam touched the edge of the ship, and reality unraveled. Metal dissolved into particles. Light bent into impossible angles. The very concept of structure seemed to collapse. Screams echoed across the bridge. Cersei cried out as her power pushed to its limit. trying to hold the ship together, but it was like trying to stop a star from going supernova with bare hands. "I can't," she gasped. And then, a streak of gold and fire tore into the beam. Icarus, he slammed into the energy with the force of a living comet, his entire body radiating power as he forced himself between the beam and the ship. For a moment, everything froze. Two cosmic forces colliding, God against God. Icarus roared, his voice echoing across space. "You will not touch them." The beam pushed back, unrelenting, unstoppable. Cracks of energy tore across Icarus' body, golden light spilling from him like blood. His strength faltered, but he didn't move. Couldn't move, because behind him, millions of lives depended on this single moment. Circe saw him and something inside her broke. "Why are we doing this?" she whispered. "We were never meant to protect them, were we?" Her mind raced. Memories, truths, lies. The Celestials didn't create the Eternals to save worlds. They created them to prepare them, to nurture civilizations, until they reached a certain point, and then to let them be harvested. Her eyes widened in horror. "This universe," she breathed. "It's ready." The realization hit her like a shockwave. The Federation, humanity, all of it. It wasn't a success. It was a signal. And now the Celestial had come to claim what was owed. Icarus screamed as the beam intensified, pushing him back inch by inch. "I won't let you," he shouted, though his voice trembled with strain. But the Celestial didn't respond, because to it, this wasn't a battle. It was maintenance. Correction. Circe made a choice no Eternal had ever made before. She stepped forward, her power flaring brighter than ever. "Then maybe," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "It's time we stopped obeying." The golden light around her exploded outward, wrapping around the Enterprise, around Icarus, around the very fabric of space itself. For a moment, just one impossible moment, the beam stopped. Not weakened, not deflected, stopped. The galaxy held its breath. Even the Celestial paused, as if noticing something unexpected, something new. Circe looked up, her eyes burning with defiance. "We choose them," she said. Silence followed, heavy, dangerous, and then the Celestial moved again. But this time, it wasn't just attacking. It was responding, adapting, evolving, because for the first time in its existence, something had resisted. And now, it was curious. The beam vanished, the pressure lifted. The Enterprise stabilized, though barely holding together. No one spoke, no one moved, because they all felt it. This wasn't over, not even close. Far beyond them, the Celestial's form shifted, its immense presence focusing, narrowing, locking onto a single target. Not the ship, not the Federation, but the Eternals themselves. A new message echoed through existence, cold, precise, unforgiving, anomaly confirmed. Eternals have deviated. Icarus fell back onto the hull of the Enterprise, barely conscious, his strength drained. Circe's heart sank, because she understood what came next. When a tool stops working, you don't fix it, you replace it, or you destroy it. And the Celestial had just made its decision. The Eternals were now the problem, and they were about to be erased. What if the Eternals, the immortal guardians of countless worlds, were suddenly reclassified as errors, and the universe itself turned against them? The silence after the beam vanished wasn't relief. It was anticipation. On the shattered bridge of the USS Enterprise, no one dared to speak. Smoke curled from ruined consoles, sparks flickered like dying stars, and the crew stood frozen, caught between survival and the terrifying knowledge that survival had not been earned. It had been allowed. Captain James T. Kirk slowly lowered himself into his chair, his eyes still locked on the view screen. "Report," he said quietly. This time, it wasn't urgency. It was something else, something heavier. Spock's hands moved across his station, though even he seemed slower, calculating something that refused to make sense. Structural integrity at 32%, multiple systems offline. However, he paused. Kirk looked at him. However, Spock turned, and for once, the certainty in his voice was gone. "The entity has ceased its attack." Kirk exhaled, but the relief didn't come, because he felt it too. That presence, still there, watching, waiting, judging. At the center of the bridge, Circe stood motionless, her golden aura dimming, but not disappearing. The crew stared at her not with gratitude, but with awe and fear. She didn't blame them, because for the first time, she feared herself. "We've changed everything," she whispered. "No," came a voice from behind her. "Icarus." He staggered forward, his body still glowing faintly with fractured energy. Every step looked like it cost him something: strength, certainty, purpose. "We didn't change anything," he said. His eyes lifted to the stars. "We just revealed it." And what they had revealed was not meant to be seen. Across the galaxy, something began to shift. Not visibly, not physically, but fundamentally. Planets continued to orbit. Stars continued to burn. But beneath it all, the rules were changing. Fastos felt it instantly. On a distant Federation outpost, every piece of technology around him began to glitch, not breaking, but hesitating, as if unsure of its own function. He stared at his hands, flexing them slowly. "They're rewriting the system," he muttered. "Not attacking, not destroying, rewriting. Because if the Eternals were anomalies, then the universe itself needed correction." Back on the Enterprise, Spock's console flickered violently. "Captain, I am detecting a universal recalibration of physical constants." Kirk blinked. In English, Spock didn't hesitate. "The laws of physics are being altered. To exclude them." He glanced at Cersei. The implication hit like a shockwave. Cersei staggered slightly as her energy flickered again, this time not from strain, but from something far worse. "Instability. I can feel it," she said, her voice trembling. "They're disconnecting us." Icarus clenched his fists. "That's impossible." But even as he said it, his flight faltered. He hovered slightly above the ground, then dropped hard onto one knee. The room fell silent. "Gods don't fall." Except now they did. Thena's voice echoed through Cersei's mind, distant but sharp. "They're unmaking us." Cersei's breath caught. Not killing, not destroying, unmaking, as if they had never existed at all. Kirk stood, stepping closer despite every instinct screaming at him not to. "Then we stop them," he said. Icarus laughed. A short, bitter sound. "Stop them," he repeated. "You don't understand. They created us. They define us." He looked up, his eyes burning with something raw. "How do you fight something that decides what you are?" Kirk didn't flinch. "You don't," he said. "A beat. You decide for yourself." The words hung in the air, simple, human, and completely alien to beings like the Eternals. Cersei stared at him. "Decide for ourselves," she echoed. Her entire existence had been defined by purpose, by design, by orders she never questioned, until now. And now the cost of questioning was everything. Spock stepped forward, his gaze analytical, despite the chaos. "If I may, Captain, this situation presents a logical paradox." Kirk raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Spock gestured toward Cersei and Icarus. "These beings were created with a specific function. However, they have demonstrated the capacity to deviate from that function." He paused, his voice sharpening. "If their creators are now attempting to eliminate them for that deviation, then the flaw does not lie with the creation." Kirk smirked faintly. "You're saying it's the creator's fault?" Spock nodded. "Precisely." Cersei felt something shift inside her, a thought, a possibility. "What if," she began, her voice uncertain. "What if we're not broken?" Icarus looked at her. "Then what are we?" She met his gaze. "Free." The word echoed. Strange, unfamiliar, dangerous. And in that moment, something impossible happened. The Celestial reacted, not with force, not with destruction, but with focus. Its immense form shifted again, the golden light intensifying as it locked onto the Eternals with terrifying precision. The message came again, louder this time, undeniable. Deviation escalating, correction required. But this time, there was something new. A second presence, fainter but growing. Another Celestial, and another, and another. Cersei's eyes widened in horror. No. Across the stars, massive shapes began to emerge, each one a god of unimaginable scale. Each one drawn by the same anomaly, the same problem, the same rebellion. "They're calling the others," she whispered. Icarus followed her gaze, his expression darkening. "This isn't judgment anymore," he said. "It's a purge." The Enterprise crew watched in stunned silence as the fabric of the cosmos filled with impossible forms, celestials, awakening, converging, preparing. Not for a single world, not for a single species, but for an entire universe. Kirk clenched his jaw. "How many?" he asked. Spock's answer came without hesitation. "Too many." The stars dimmed further. Warp lanes collapsed. Entire regions of space began to destabilize under the sheer weight of their presence. Because this wasn't just an attack, it was a reset. Cersei felt her power flicker again, weaker now, unstable. Time was running out, not just for them, for everything. She turned to Icarus, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "We can't fight them," she said. He nodded. "For once, I agree." Kirk stepped forward. "Then what's the plan?" Cersei looked at the crew, at the ship, at this fragile, defiant civilization that had somehow reached the stars without gods. And she realized something. "They don't understand this universe," she said slowly. Icarus frowned. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly. "They think it's a failure." Her eyes hardened. "But what if it's something more? A beat? What if this universe isn't broken?" The Celestials moved closer. The void trembled. Reality bent under their collective will, and for the first time, the Eternals weren't just questioning their purpose. They were about to defy it completely. But the question remained, could defiance alone stop gods, or would it only make the destruction worse? Because the next move wouldn't just decide their fate, it would decide the fate of the entire Star Trek universe. And the Celestials were done waiting. What if the only way to stop the gods was to prove that this universe had already surpassed them? The stars were no longer just distant lights. They had become witnesses, silent, trembling, watching as entities older than time itself gathered to decide whether this universe deserved to exist. On the fractured bridge of the USS Enterprise, the weight of that judgment, pressed down like gravity itself, had doubled. Captain James T. Kirk stared into the abyss of the viewscreen, where golden giants now filled the void. His voice was steady but only just. "Options," he said. Spock didn't answer immediately, because there were none. Instead, the Spock stepped closer to Cersei, his sharp gaze analyzing her not as an enemy, but as a possibility. "You stated that these entities do not understand this universe," he said. "Explain." Cersei inhaled slowly, trying to steady the storm inside her. "They see evolution as a controlled process," she said. "Growth guided by design, by intervention, by them." Her eyes lifted toward the Celestials. "They don't believe in unpredictability." Kirk frowned. "You're saying they think everything should follow a plan?" "Yes," Cersei replied. "A perfect path, no deviations." Icarus let out a bitter breath. "And we just proved them wrong." Cersei nodded. "Exactly." A quiet realization began to spread across the bridge. Spock tilted his head slightly. "Then their conclusion is logical," he said. "If this universe has deviated beyond acceptable parameters, it must be corrected." Kirk crossed his arms. "Or maybe they're just wrong." Spock didn't disagree. But he didn't agree either, because logic didn't favor hope. Cersei stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. "They think this universe is flawed because it wasn't guided by them," she said. "Because humanity reached the stars without needing gods." Her gaze softened, just slightly. "But that's what makes it different." The crew listened. Even those who didn't fully understand felt it. "This universe didn't follow their design," Cersei continued. "It created its own." Outside, the Celestials shifted, their immense forms aligning like a cosmic tribunal. A low vibration rippled through space, not sound, but something deeper. A decision approaching. Icarus clenched his jaw. "You think they'll just listen?" he asked. Cersei shook her head. "No." A pause. "But they might observe." Kirk raised an eyebrow. "Observe what?" Cersei turned to him. "Proof." The word landed like a spark. "Proof that this universe isn't broken," she said. "Proof that it doesn't need them." Spock's eyes narrowed slightly. "And how do you propose we demonstrate that to beings capable of rewriting reality?" Cersei hesitated, because that was the problem. "How do you prove worth? To gods who measure value in entire civilizations?" Before she could answer, the Celestials acted, not with destruction, not yet, but with something far more terrifying. The stars around them began to shift, constellations twisted into unnatural shapes. Warp pathways collapsed like threads being cut. Entire regions of space became unstable, unpredictable. Reality itself was being tested. Fasto's voice echoed through the comms, strained but urgent. "They're running simulations on a universal scale," he said. "They're pushing the limits, looking for weaknesses." Kirk's expression hardened. "Weaknesses," Spock answered. "Points of failure," he said. "Moments where the system breaks down under pressure." Cersei's heart sank. "They're not judging what this universe is," she whispered. "They're judging what it becomes, under stress." And already, cracks were forming. On distant worlds, chaos erupted. Civilizations panicked as the laws of physics shifted unpredictably. Starships lost control. Entire fleets vanished into unstable warp fields. Fear spread. Conflict followed. Because when the universe itself becomes uncertain, so do the people within it. Icarus looked out at the chaos, his expression dark. "This is what they wanted," he said. "They're forcing the universe to prove it can survive without them." Cersei nodded slowly. "And if it can't?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Kirk turned sharply. "Then we don't let it fail." All eyes turned to him. "You heard her," he continued. "They're testing us." "Fine, we passed the test." Spock raised an eyebrow. "Captain, with respect, the scale of this test is beyond anything the Federation has encountered." Kirk smirked slightly. "Then it's a good thing we're not alone." He glanced at Cersei, at Icarus, at the impossible beings now standing beside them. Cersei felt something shift again. Not in the universe, in herself. For the first time, she wasn't acting because she was told to. She was choosing. "We can help stabilize it," she said. "Guide the fluctuations. Protect key systems." Icarus frowned. "And what happens when they push harder?" Cersei met his gaze. "Then we push back." The plan wasn't perfect. It wasn't even safe. But it was something. And right now, something was all they had. Outside, the Celestials intensified their test. A nearby star began to collapse prematurely, its energy spiraling out of control. A chain reaction threatened to wipe out an entire sector. Multiple systems at risk. Spock called out. Kirk didn't hesitate. Helm set course. Full impulse. Sulu glanced back. "Sir, we could be flying straight into a supernova." Kirk's voice was unwavering. "Then let's make sure it doesn't happen." The Enterprise surged forward, engines straining as it raced toward the collapsing star. Cersei closed her eyes, focusing her energy. She could feel the instability, the chaos, the fear, not just in space, but in the people. "They're watching how we respond," she said softly. "Not as individuals, but as a whole." Icarus hovered beside her, his strength still not fully restored. "And what if they don't like the answer?" Cersei opened her eyes. Her voice was steady now. "Then we give them a better one." The Enterprise dropped out of warp near the unstable star, its surface writhing with violent energy. Without hesitation, Cersei extended her power, golden light reaching out to stabilize the reaction. Phastos joined remotely, guiding energy flows across multiple systems. Thena coordinated defense efforts on threatened worlds. For the first time, the Eternals weren't acting as overseers, they were acting as allies, and humanity didn't stand back. Starfleet vessels across the sector responded, forming a network of support. Civilizations shared resources, coordinated evacuations, worked together in ways no Celestial could have predicted. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't controlled, but it worked. Slowly, the star stabilized, the chain reaction halted, lives were saved. On the bridge, a quiet tension filled the air. Spock checked his readings. "The collapse has been contained," he said. Kirk allowed himself a small smile. Score 1 for the home team. But Cersei didn't smile, because she felt it. The Celestials were still watching, still measuring, and then they escalated. Far beyond them, space itself began to tear open. Not a rift, not a distortion, but a wound. Something new was emerging, something the Eternals had never seen before. Cersei's breath caught. "That's not part of the test," she said. Icarus' eyes narrowed. "Then what is it?" The answer came not in words, but in presence. A darker energy spilled from the tear, chaotic, unstable, alive in a way that defied even Celestial design. The Celestials didn't move to stop it. They didn't react at all, because this was the next phase. Not just a test of survival, but a test of control. And the universe had just become far more dangerous. Cersei stared into the growing darkness, her voice barely a whisper. "What if they've unleashed something they can't control?" The tear widened. The stars around it dimmed, and from within, something began to emerge. What if the Celestials' test didn't just threaten the universe, but unleashed something that even gods had tried to bury? The tear in space didn't expand like an explosion. It spread like a thought, slow, unavoidable, hungry. On the bridge of the USS Enterprise, every sensor began to fail, not because they were damaged, but because they could no longer define what they were detecting. Spock stared at the readings, his composure finally cracking at the edges. "Captain, this phenomenon does not conform to any known classification of matter or energy." James T. Kirk narrowed his eyes. "Then give me your best guess." Spock hesitated. That alone was enough to send a chill across the bridge. "It is not part of this universe." Silence followed. Not confusion, not fear, something deeper. Because if it wasn't part of this universe, then where did it come from? Cersei felt it like a scream inside her mind. Not a voice, not a signal, but a presence that didn't belong. Her golden aura flickered violently as she staggered back. "No," she whispered, "they wouldn't." Icarus turned sharply. "What is it?" Her eyes locked onto the growing tear. "They didn't create this," she said. "A beat. They released it." The words landed heavier than any attack. Outside, the darkness coiled outward, tendrils of shifting void slipping into normal space. Stars near the tear dimmed and not extinguished, but drained, like something was feeding. Fasto's voice cut through the cums, sharper than before. "That energy signature, it's not consuming matter. It's consuming potential," he said. "It's erasing what could exist." Kirk frowned. "What does that even mean?" Spock answered, his voice tight. "It means, Captain, it is not destroying reality." A pause. "It is undoing possibility." The implications were staggering. Planets near the tear didn't explode. They simplified. Complex ecosystems reduced to barren rock. Advanced structures reverted into raw elements. Entire histories erased as if they had never been written. Cersei's hands trembled. "I've seen this before," she said. Icarus turned to her. "Where?" Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Before Earth, before humanity." His expression darkened. "You're talking about..." "Yes," she said. "Something the Celestials tried to erase." The truth began to surface. Long before the Eternals were sent to guide civilizations, there had been failures, experiments, universes that didn't follow the design. And in those failures, something had formed. Not life, not death, but the absence of both. A force that didn't destroy. It unmade meaning itself. Icarus clenched his fists. "Then why would they release it here?" Cersei's answer came with quiet horror. "Because if this universe can survive that," she didn't need to finish, "it would prove everything, or erase everything." On the view screen, the tear pole stand then, something emerged. Not a creature, not a ship, a shape that refused to stay consistent. It shifted constantly, like reality couldn't decide what it was looking at, and yet, everyone saw it, felt it, a presence that made existence itself feel fragile. Crew members collapsed to their knees, overwhelmed by a sudden, crushing emptiness. One officer whispered, tears in his eyes, I can't remember my family." Another stared at his hands. "What am I doing here?" The thing wasn't attacking their bodies, it was attacking their purpose. Kirk gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay focused. "Snap out of it," he shouted, but even he felt it, the creeping doubt, the erosion of certainty. Why fight? Why survive? Why exist at all? Spock gripped his console, his logic struggling against something fundamentally illogical. "This entity negates motivation," he said. "It removes the foundational drives that sustain intelligent life." Cersei stepped forward, her voice strained but determined. "It's worse than that," she said. "It makes everything feel meaningless." Icarus looked at the spreading darkness, his jaw tightening. "Then we destroy it." Cersei shook her head instantly. "You can't destroy something that isn't there," she said. "It's not a being, it's a concept, a terrifying realization. You can fight an enemy, you can even fight a god. But how do you fight? Nothing." Outside, Starfleet vessels began to drift aimlessly, their crews losing cohesion. Entire fleets stalled as coordination broke down. Civilizations that had just worked together moments ago now turned inward, paralyzed by uncertainty. The test was working, and this time humanity was failing. Kirk saw it happening, felt it spreading, and for a moment, just a moment, he hesitated. What was the point? Against gods? Against this? What difference could one ship make? Then he looked around, at his crew, at Spock, at the chaos outside, and something inside him refused to break. "No," he said quietly, then louder. "No." The word cut through the haze like a blade. Cersei turned to him, surprised. Kirk stepped forward, his voice steady now. "You're wrong," he said, looking at the darkness. It didn't respond, but it noticed. "This universe isn't defined by perfection," he continued, "or design, or control." He clenched his fist. "It's defined by choice." The crew looked at him, some still shaken, some barely holding on, but listening. "You don't get to decide what matters," Kirk said, his voice rising. "We do." For a moment, the darkness paused, not retreating, not attacking, just pausing, as if processing something it had never encountered before. Cersei felt it too. A shift, small but real. "It's reacting," she whispered. Spock's eyes narrowed. "Captain, your statement has introduced a variable it cannot immediately negate." Kirk smirked faintly. "Good. Icarus looked between them, something new flickering in his expression. Understanding. So that's the answer, he said. Not power, not control. Cersei finished the thought. Meaning. The darkness pulsed again, stronger this time. It pushed back, harder. Crew members cried out as the weight of emptiness returned, heavier than before, because it was adapting, learning, and it wouldn't stop. Cersei steadied herself, her golden energy flaring once more. Then, we don't just resist it, she said. We overwhelm it. Kirk turned to her. How? She looked at the crew, at the ship, at the countless lives across the galaxy, with everything it can't erase. Hope, connection, choice, the very things the Celestials never accounted for. Icarus rose beside her, his strength returning just enough. Then, let's show it what this universe really is. Outside, the darkness surged. The Celestials watched, and for the first time, the outcome of their test was no longer certain. But the question remained, could meaning itself survive against something designed to erase it? Or was this the moment the universe finally gave up? The darkness expanded again, closer, stronger, and this time, it reached for the Enterprise. What if the only way to defeat something that erases meaning was to remind the entire universe why it exists? The darkness didn't rush toward the USS Enterprise. It arrived, not as movement, not as force, but as absence. 1 second, the stars were there flickering, distant, alive. The next, they weren't gone. They just didn't matter anymore. On the bridge, silence fell, not the calm kind, but the kind that hollowed out thought itself. A crewman slowly lowered his hands from the console, blinking as if waking from a dream. What was I doing? He murmured. Another officer sat down, her posture slack. Does it even matter? Even the hum of the ship, the constant reassurance of life and motion, began to fade into something forgettable. Cersei felt it hit her harder this time, not like pressure, like erosion. Her thoughts blurred. Her purpose, something she had held onto for thousands of years, began to slip through her grasp like sand. Why fight? Why resist? Why care? Her golden energy dimmed, flickering dangerously as her will weakened. This is how it wins, she whispered, not by force, but by making resistance feel pointless. Beside her, Icarus staggered, his eyes losing their fire. The certainty that had once defined him, his unwavering belief in purpose, crumbled under the weight of nothingness. All those worlds we protected, he said slowly, did any of it matter? Cersei turned to him, her heart tightening, because if he lost faith, then everything truly might be lost. At the helm, hands slipped from controls. Navigation faltered. The Enterprise drifted, not damaged, not disabled, just directionless. On countless worlds, the same thing was happening. Civilizations didn't collapse in fire. They simply stopped, because when meaning disappears, so does the will to act. Spock gripped the edge of his console, his mind fighting against something it had never been trained to confront. Logic depended on purpose, on reason, on structure, and this thing stripped all of it away. Captain, he said, his voice strained for the first time, but he didn't finish, because he didn't know what to say. James T. Kirk stood at the center of it all, breathing heavily as the weight of the darkness pressed down on him. He felt it too. The doubt, the question, what difference could one man make against something like this? His hands trembled slightly. His thoughts slowed. For a moment, just a moment, he almost let go. Then he saw them, his crew, not as officers, not as roles, but as people, struggling, fading, losing something they didn't even realize they were losing, and something inside him snapped back into place. No, he said under his breath. The word felt small, insignificant, but it was his. He stepped forward, his voice rising not as a command, but as a refusal. No. The sound echoed across the bridge, not loud, but defiant. Heads turned, not because they were ordered to, but because something in that word cut through. Kirk clenched his fists, forcing every ounce of will into his voice. This isn't who we are. The darkness pulsed, as if reacting, but it didn't stop. It pressed harder, trying to smother the spark before it could grow. Kirk didn't back down. You want us to believe nothing matters, he said, staring into the void beyond the viewscreen. Then you don't know us at all. Cersei looked at him, her fading light flickering again, slightly stronger this time. What are you doing? She whispered. Kirk didn't look at her. I'm reminding it, he said. Reminding it of what? Icarus asked, his voice barely holding together. Kirk smiled faintly. Of everything it can't understand. He turned to the crew. To all of you, he said. Listen to me. Some eyes focused. Others struggled, but slowly. Attention returned, not fully, but enough. We've faced impossible odds before, Kirk continued. Stronger enemies, bigger threats, things we had no right to survive. A pause, and we're still here. Spock straightened slightly, his mind grasping onto the structure of Kirk's words. They need us, Kirk said, his voice steady now. Not because we're perfect, not because we were designed to succeed. He looked around the bridge, but because we choose to. The word echoed again. Choose. Cersei felt it resonate deep within her. Choice, not purpose given. Purpose taken. Her energy flared faintly, pushing back against the emptiness. I remember, she said softly. Icarus turned to her. What? She looked at him, her eyes clearer now. Why I stayed on Earth, she said. Not because she was ordered to, not because it was her mission, but because she wanted to. And that was something no Celestial had ever programmed. The darkness recoiled slightly, not retreating, but hesitating. Spock stepped forward, his voice regaining its precision. Captain, your approach appears to be introducing resistance at a conceptual level. Kirk nodded. Then we push harder. He looked at Cersei. Can you amplify it? She hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Her hands rose, golden energy building once more, not as raw power, but as something deeper. Connection, memory, meaning. She reached out, not to matter, not to energy, but to minds. Across the Enterprise, across nearby ships, across the stars. A pulse spread outward, not of force, but of remembrance. People remembered why they fought, why they explored, why they cared. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough. The darkness shuddered. For the first time, it was being resisted. Icarus rose slowly, his strength returning as the emptiness lost its grip. So this is it, he said. Not power, not obedience. Cersei smiled faintly, but belief. Outside, the void twisted violently, reacting to something it had never encountered before. Not force, not control, but defiance, rooted in meaning, and far beyond it all. The Celestials watched. For the first time they did not remain perfectly still. A shift, subtle, but undeniable, because this outcome, this resistance, was not part of their design, and the test was no longer under their control. The darkness surged again, stronger, more aggressive, because now, it wasn't just erasing, it was fighting back. And this time, it aimed not at the ship, not at the crew, but at the source, at Cersei, at Kirk, at the very idea they were spreading. Because if that idea survived, it would change everything. Cersei gasped as the void lashed out, a wave of nothingness tearing toward her. I can't hold it, she cried. Icarus moved instantly, stepping in front of her, but even he hesitated, because this wasn't something he could punch. Kirk didn't move, didn't run. He stood his ground. Then we don't hold it, he said. Cersei looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Kirk's eyes hardened. We face it. The wave of darkness closed in, everything slowed. Every heartbeat, every thought, balanced on a single moment. Because this wasn't just a clash of power anymore. It was a clash of ideas, meaning, versus nothing, and only one could survive. What if, in the final moment before everything disappeared, the universe had to choose what it truly believed in? The darkness didn't hesitate anymore. It surged forward, vast, consuming, inevitable, like the end of a thought before it could be finished. On the bridge of the USS Enterprise, time seemed to fracture into fragments. Every second stretched, every breath felt heavier, every heartbeat louder. Because this wasn't just another attack. This was the answer. The universe was being asked a question, and the darkness was demanding silence. Cersei stood at the center of it all, her golden energy blazing and flickering at one spot, between resistance and collapse. I can't stop it, she shouted, her voice breaking as the wave of nothingness tore closer. It's too strong. Beside her, Icarus clenched his fists, his body glowing as he prepared to throw himself into the impossible. But for the first time, he didn't move, because something inside him understood. This wasn't a battle of strength. It never was. James T. Kirk stepped forward instead, not as a captain, not as a soldier, but as a man. You're right, he said quietly. Cersei looked at him, shocked. What? He met her eyes. We can't stop it. The words felt like surrender, but they weren't. The darkness surged faster, sensing weakness pressing harder, trying to collapse the fragile resistance forming against it. Spock's voice cut in, strained but precise. Captain, impact imminent. Kirk didn't react, didn't flinch. Then we don't fight it, he said. Icarus frowned. Have you lost your mind? Kirk shook his head slowly. No, he said. I finally understand it. The wave of nothingness loomed just beyond the hull now, its presence erasing light, distorting thought, unraveling purpose, and yet, Kirk stepped closer to it, not away, toward it. You said it yourself, he continued, looking at Cersei. It doesn't destroy things, it removes meaning. Cersei's breath caught. Yes. Kirk turned, addressing everyone, his crew, the Eternals, the entire trembling moment. Then maybe the reason it's winning, he took one more step forward, is because we're trying to fight it. The realization hit like a spark in the dark. Icarus narrowed his eyes. If we don't fight, then what do we do? Kirk smiled faintly. We show it something it can't erase. The wave struck, and for a split second, everything disappeared. Sound, light, thought, even the sense of self. Gone. But then, something remained. Not matter, not energy, a choice. Cersei felt it first. A flicker, a memory. Not of orders, not of purpose given to her, but of a moment. A simple, human moment. A laugh, a connection, a feeling she had chosen to keep. And it didn't disappear. Her eyes snapped open. It's still there, she whispered. Around her, others felt it too. Fragments of meaning that refused to fade, not because they were strong, but because they were chosen. The darkness pulsed violently, as if confused, as if encountering something it had no framework to process. Spock's voice returned, clearer now. Fascinating. The entity cannot negate subjective meaning that is self-defined. Kirk nodded, his voice steady, even as the void pressed against him. Because it doesn't understand it, he said. It only knows what's given. The wave of nothingness surged again, trying to erase the flickers that remained. But this time they didn't fade, they multiplied. Across the Enterprise, the crew began to stand straighter, not because they were commanded to, but because they remembered why they stood at all. Across distant ships, civilizations, entire world sparks reignited, not perfectly, not all at once, but enough. Cersei's power flared, not forced, not strained, but flowing naturally as her will aligned with something deeper. I see it now, she said, her voice filled with quiet awe. We were never meant to control them. She looked at the stars, because they were never meant to need us. Icarus stepped beside her, his strength returning not from duty, but from understanding. Then what were we meant to do? He asked. Cersei smiled faintly. Learn. The darkness recoiled slightly, its form destabilizing as the concept it embodied began to fracture. Because meaning was no longer something it could remove. It had become something the universe created for itself. Far beyond, the Celestials shifted. For the first time since their arrival, they did not appear certain. The test had changed. No longer about control, no longer about design, but about something they had never truly accounted for. Freedom. The darkness lashed out again, desperate now, unstable, targeting the strongest sources of resistance. Cersei, Icarus, Kirk. Because if it could erase them, it could still win. Cersei raised her hands, but this time, she didn't try to block it. She didn't try to control it. She let the energy flow outward, connecting, amplifying, spreading. Kirk stood beside her, unwavering. Together, he said. Icarus nodded. Together. The wave hit again, but instead of silence, there was something else. A surge, not of power, but of presence. Millions of minds, countless choices, infinite moments of meaning, all colliding into a single, undeniable truth. The universe chose itself. The darkness faltered, cracked, not destroyed but undone, because it had no answer for something that didn't need permission to exist. Cersei gasped as the void began to collapse inward, its form unraveling into nothingness once more. It's working, she said. But even as she spoke, she felt it, a shift, a far greater presence moving, watching, deciding. The Celestials, they had seen everything, every moment, every choice, every defiance, and now, they would deliver their final judgment. The darkness vanished completely. Silence returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full, alive, earned. The Enterprise stabilized, its systems flickering back to life. Crew members looked around, breathing heavily, as if waking from a nightmare they couldn't fully remember. Kirk exhaled slowly. Status. Spock checked his console. All systems are recovering, he said. A pause. The anomaly has been neutralized, but his voice carried something else. Uncertainty. Because above them, the stars shifted once more. The Celestials moved forward closer than ever before, their immense forms filling the sky like gods descending from myth. Cersei felt her heart race. This is it, she whispered. Icarus stood beside her, his expression unreadable. They've seen what we've done. Kirk looked up, unflinching. Then let's see what they think. The golden light intensified, the presence of the Celestials overwhelming once more, but different now. Not hostile, not passive, something else, something evaluative. A voice echoed across existence, vast, ancient, impossible to ignore. Test concluded. The universe held its breath. Deviation observed. Cersei clenched her fists. Icarus tensed. Kirk stood still, because the next words would decide everything, and for the first time since the beginning, even the gods hesitated. What if the final judgment of gods wasn't about power, but about whether they could accept a universe that no longer needed them? The stars stood still, not frozen, but waiting. Across the infinite expanse, the Celestials loomed vast beyond comprehension, their golden forms radiating a presence that bent reality simply by existing. On the bridge of the USS Enterprise, no one moved, no one spoke, because this was it. Not a battle, not a test, a verdict. Cersei stood at the center, her light no longer unstable, no longer uncertain, but different, softer, yet stronger, no longer tied to command, but to choice. Beside her, Icarus watched the Celestials with a gaze that had changed completely. Once, he had looked at them with loyalty. Now, he looked at them as an equal facing judgment. And at the front of it all, James T. Kirk stood with quiet defiance, arms at his sides, eyes steady, not challenging gods, not submitting to them, simply standing. The voice came again, not from a single Celestial, but from all of them, layered, infinite, absolute, outcome, unexpected. The words echoed through existence itself. Cersei felt them not as sound, but as understanding. They didn't predict this, she whispered. Spock, ever observant even now, stepped slightly forward. Indeed, said Spock, their model of evolution appears to lack variables associated with autonomous meaning. Kirk smirked faintly. In simpler terms, Spock glanced at him. They didn't think we could choose our own purpose. The Celestials shifted, not aggressively, not passively, but thoughtfully. Deviation, sustained, a pause, longer this time, as if the universe itself held its breath alongside them. Then correction, no longer viable. Cersei's eyes widened. Icarus inhaled sharply. Kirk didn't move, because none of them fully understood what that meant, until the next words came. Observation will continue. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was release. The pressure that had weighed on existence itself began to lift. The stars brightened, space stabilized. The subtle tension woven into reality since the Celestials' arrival unraveled. They weren't destroying the universe, they weren't resetting it, they were letting it be. Cersei exhaled, a breath she felt like she had been holding for centuries. They're leaving, she said softly. Icarus didn't look away from the immense forms. Not leaving, he said, watching. High above, the Celestials began to withdraw, not vanishing, not disappearing, but receding into the deeper fabric of the cosmos. Their presence fading like distant thunder after a storm. Not gone, but no longer intervening. For the first time since their creation, the Eternals were not being directed, not being judged, not being corrected. They were free. Kirk let out a slow breath, finally allowing the tension in his shoulders to drop. Well, he said quietly, that's one way to pass a test. Spock raised an eyebrow. Captain, I would argue that we did not pass the test. Kirk glanced at him. Oh, Spock's gaze shifted to Cersei, then to the stars. We redefined it. A faint smile touched Kirk's lips. Even better. Around them, the crew began to recover, fully systems stabilizing, voices returning, purpose reigniting, not from command, but from within. The Enterprise lived again, not because it was saved, but because it had chosen to keep going. Cersei looked at her hands, the golden energy now calm, steady, alive in a way she had never felt before. No orders, she whispered, no purpose given. Icarus stepped beside her. Then what do we do now? She looked out at the stars, at the vast, unpredictable, beautiful chaos of a universe that had just proven something even gods didn't expect. We live in it, she said, not above it. A quiet moment passed between them. Then Kirk stepped closer. So, he said, folding his arms, are you staying? Cersei turned to him, a small, genuine smile forming. For the first time, it's my choice. Icarus glanced at her, then at the endless stars, and slowly, he nodded. Then I suppose, he said, we finally get to see what this universe becomes. Spock observed them carefully, his analytical mind already processing the implications. Fascinating, he said. Beings once bound by absolute purpose, now operating under independent volition. Kirk chuckled. Welcome to our world. Far beyond them, where even starships could not reach, the Celestials lingered at the edge of perception, watching, learning, because something had changed. Not just in the universe they had tested, but in themselves. For the first time, they had encountered something they could not design, something they could not control, something they could only observe, and perhaps something they could one day understand. Back aboard the Enterprise, the stars stretched endlessly ahead, no longer under judgment, no longer under threat, just, open, infinite, alive with possibility. Kirk returned to his chair, his voice calm, steady, familiar. Helm, he said. Set a course. Sulu turned, a hint of a smile on his face. Course, Captain. Kirk leaned back, looking out at the vast unknown. Anywhere, he said. Let's see what's out there. The engines hummed, the ship moved, and the universe moved with it. Not guided, not controlled, but chosen. And somewhere, deep in the fabric of existence, a quiet truth echoed: the greatest power in any universe is not creation, is not destruction. It is the ability to choose what comes next. And that was something even gods had to learn.